Throughout many cultures and eras, music has driven philosophical, theological, and spiritual exploration. From the harmonic structures of Pythagoras, which sought to unveil the mathematical order and harmony of the cosmos, to the sacred chants of religious ritual aiming to bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine, music as a medium is uniquely capable of expressing the ineffable. Alexander Scriabin's Mysterium is a profound exemplar of this relationship between the theological, philosophical, and sonic. It is also possibly a catalyst for the Rapture. Mysterium is an unfinished multidisciplinary orchestral experience by Russian composer Alexander Scriabin. Despite never being finished, the piece spans over 2.5 hours of dense and haunting instrumentation, and it's truly beautiful. One might think that at this length the piece had almost been completed, but that would be a catastrophic mistake, as Scriabin intended for the piece to be played for 7 days and 7 nights, unbroken. Mysterium was also to be performed at the footholds of the Himalayas. Scriabin envisioned Mysterium as a sort of ritualistic multimedia performance encapsulating sound, scent, light, and movement that would fuse its audience not just into each other, but into the universe as a whole, and all of this achieved through art. I must clarify, I'm not speaking in some kind of poetic metaphor here, as Scriabin genuinely believed this to be possible through his work. But how could this be the case? How could somebody believe such a thing? Well, let's discuss. Alexander Scriabin took a particular interest in German philosophy, notably that of Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, the latter being of significance due to his rather unusual connection to the Nietzschean ideal of the Übermensch. The Übermensch is described by Nietzsche as an ideal being, one that's more psychologically advanced. Take this quote from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. "I teach you the Overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great flood and even go back to the beasts rather than overcome man? What is the ape to man? A laughingstock or a painful embarrassment. A man shall be just that for the Overman. A laughingstock or a painful embarrassment." One of the most important things to note about this concept is that the Übermensch doesn't represent some tangible being or something you can legitimately become, but it is instead an ideal one must strive for to overcome nihilism. It isn't something you simply are, but something you must struggle to be, even though you never will be it. Despite not explicitly referring to himself as such, Scriabin's self-image and philosophy strongly align with this idea of the Übermensch. His mysticism, his compulsory artistic mission, and his personal writings reveal a belief in his own exceptionalism, viewing himself as a being of divine status. It is known that Scriabin was captivated by Nietzsche's writings, thus I believe this is a fair speculation to make. I also find it of note to mention to you that a posthumously released journal of Scriabin's reads, "I am God, I am nothing. I'm play, I am freedom, I am life, I am the boundary, I am the peak." Now, whether this means Scriabin views artists as a whole as being of divine status, or if he literally means he is God, it's difficult for me to discern, but notable nonetheless. This reading of Nietzschean philosophy may explain why Alexander Scriabin thought himself the right man for the job, but it doesn't quite explore the job itself. We may be closer to understanding his motivations, but not yet have we discussed how he thought this kind of musical rapture to be possible in the first place. And to understand that, we've got to delve into metaphysics. Alexander Scriabin was a firm believer in the divinity of the arts and their creators. I believe it could be argued that this perspective was influenced by Schopenhauer, who Scriabin would have engaged with extensively being a philosopher in the 19th century. It was Schopenhauer who said, "We must attribute to music a far more serious and profound significance that refers to the innermost being of the world and of our own self." This quote illustrates a perspective on music that transcends mere aesthetics. When Schopenhauer refers to the innermost being of the world, I believe he is talking about will, that elusive quality that underlies everything. It's not free, by the way. Music, in Schopenhauer's view, has the unique ability to express this will. Unlike other art forms that may be more directly representational, music can bypass the intellect and speak directly to the emotions and subconscious. It offers a deeper, perhaps more authentic connection to will. Through Schopenhauer's metaphysical framework, music can be understood as a medium that is not constrained by the rational structures of language or visual representation. Music, in its purest form, does not represent the world as we know it, but instead speaks to a deeper understanding of reality itself. Through this framework, Scriabin's ambitious goal of uniting humanity with Mysterium as a catalyst becomes a lot more understandable. The multisensory nature of the piece, melding music, movement, scent, and light together, seems tailored to speak to this underlying will that Schopenhauer describes. In removing the barriers of intellect and focusing on shared sensory experience, Scriabin hoped to create an experience where universal will could be achieved. The combating harmonies, the cascading notes across octaves, and the rich, rhythmic textures embody this principle. One could easily understand the image of listeners being sent into a metaphysical state where individuality dissolves into a shared essence. If music really does have the ability to transcend individual intellect and speak to some sort of universal will, would Mysterium not be the piece to do so? Mysterium is will. Mysterium is divinity. Mysterium is the ineffable. So how does one approach communicating such grandiosity? This is a question that no doubt plagued the mind of the composer, as evidenced by his drive to create an entirely unique language just for Mysterium. Until his death, Scriabin spent his time not just composing music, but his own language with roots derived from Sanskrit. The language would contain vocalizations such as grunts, cries, and exhalations that are rather unusual for a lot of modern languages. Sanskrit, I must add, is an infamously complex language, not just due to its vast array of sounds, but also due to its connection to divinity. As I understand it, Sanskrit is primarily spoken in India and has a particularly significant role to play in religious ceremonies, as it's considered a sacred language in Hinduism. I see a really interesting link here between Scriabin's fascination with Sanskrit as a language and also his desire to perform Mysterium at the footholds of the Himalayas. You see, the Himalayas span many of the areas that Sanskrit would have originated, including India. Alexander Scriabin's devotion to his work was so intensive yet so complex that even today it is difficult to understand the full scope of Mysterium. Though we may never know what the finished project was intended to be, we are fortunate enough to have access to countless writings, compositions, and illustrations that act as breadcrumbs to a larger piece. I want to thank you for joining me today as I get to talk about Mysterium, which is a composition that I'm so passionate about. It's not just one of my favorite pieces of classical music, it's one of my favorite pieces of music in general. If you haven't gotten the chance to listen to it before, I will link it in the description, and I highly encourage you to check it out. It is beautiful. If there's anything you'd like to add, or just want to share your experience listening to Mysterium, please drop it in the comments below. I'll be sure to pin any corrections you guys make, or any kind of further information that could add to this crazy puzzle with all these missing pieces. It's just very exciting, and I think the best way to understand it is through a kind of community effort. Thanks again. Bye!